Hello, in the first series of this series on ABS engraving plastic carved for relief printing, I showed the tools most commonly used. Now we're going to look at them more closely and show the tools and the uses and the effects of the two electrically powered tools, the rotary tool with the file bits and the ultrasonic cutter. This is the rotary tool with a file bit installed. It is rechargeable. The rotary file bits, which come to you in very inexpensive sets with different geometries, cut quite easily but noisily and messily with ABS plastic. A lot of fine debris floats around. Their first advantage is that they can carve this hard plastic, especially when you want to remove a large area to be white, where you have to cut very deeply to have any chance of printing cleanly. Now, with careful planning, careful handling, the rotary files can cut reasonably finely, but it is difficult to duplicate the very fine, clean cuts of gravers and burins and other engraving tools. But I find that in the style that often pleases me, the rather rough cuts lend an attractive quality. Let's look at one. This is a copy of one print. Title is Despair Room. Now, here I found the roughness to be an advantage. This is the uncleaned block. The roughness turned out to be perfect in the context of a dilapidated room with its worn furnishings. The curtains are shaggy, the mattress is foul, the floorboards are worn, and the wall paint is peeling. When some precision is desired, it's best to cut the edges of the area to be carved with the engraving tool first with hand tools, and then use the rotary tool to move up to that clean cut. The rapidly rotating bit can get out of control, so it's nice to have a guide to go by. I have drawn inspiration for several projects, including this one, from the photos that are posted online by people who explore abandoned buildings. The rotary file with a blunt tip is ideal for making rough gestures to depict wood and stone. A bit that comes to a very sharp point can work into small areas like facial features. Indeed, it is sometimes possible to carve an entire project with the rotary tool, although I nearly always resort to hand tools for details. The rotary file can do some things I would find very difficult to do with engraving tools. One is to produce a credible face of a rough cut stone wall. An example of that here is in a piece called Rebel Angels, where the background is a stone-faced wall. This is what the block looks like. You can see what you might consider chatter, but is actually intentionally left rough on that stone. Another is this one. This is a copy of the print. The stone wall, I wanted to look like a stone wall. The gravel at the gravel roadway, I wanted to look like a roadway. Here's a close-up inset that shows both of those. The stone wall was cut by first drawing out the mortar lines between the blocks, and then using the rotary file to carve away inside, leaving the rough surface, knowing a lot of it's going to print, and that was the intention, to let that print and to show that that rock wall to look roughly carved, like this one. I also used it uh, to do the roadway, the gravel roadway. That was done by using the rotary tool as a stippling tool and just touching it to the surface repeatedly, many, many times. Um, and the more densely you do the stippling, of course, the lighter the overall roadway becomes. When I move into shadow, that's done by just reducing the amount of stippling. So when I want to move into shadow, up into here, I just reduced the rate of stippling. In fact, in this one, I went back and did that roadway a second time to make it lighter because I felt like it was too dark on the first pass. Now, this same tool will do other things, of course. One thing it will do is to drive a little polishing wheel to finely polish the face of these engraving tools once they've been sharpened. I also use it, and we'll show this in a second, to bevel the inside edges of a broad white area that I've cut out entirely. And now that brings us to the ultrasonic cutter. Now the ultrasonic cutter is not rechargeable. I looked at the reviews and it looked to me like the batteries did not have the kind of life I wanted for a whole project. So I allowed this one just to be wired. It's USB cable power. Does have to use the kind of adapter you would use for rapid charging, and one came with it. Now, the USB cable doesn't get in my way because most of the jobs I'm doing with this are fairly close focus and fairly small. That comes with a variety of blades. I like, for carving this ABS plastic, I like one with a fairly shallow angle because that lets me get all the way through the plastic. But there are other blades you can use for other tools. These are very popular with model makers and with 3D modelers for cleanly cutting away the excess from their castings or their 3D models, or where they've broken a piece from the model off of its casting. This one also came with a buffing blade that uses this ultrasonic cutter to polish. That was I haven't done that. That was interesting. Now my primary goal for the cutter is to remove broad white areas. Because, as you know, we've talked about this before, with such a thin material, the 1/20th of an inch ABS plastic, that's all you can cut. That's as deeply as you can go, 1/20th of an inch. That's a severe limit to how deeply white areas can be cut, and it's almost inevitable there's going to be a lot of chatter in any broad white area because the brayer tends to drop into that cut space. And because the material is so hard, cutting all the way down in a broad space just takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. It's not a lot of fun. The solution is to just use the cutter and cut the entire area away. An example, and this is a work in progress. The windows at the top center I deemed were sufficiently large that if I didn't cut them away, they would be difficult to ink without chatter, and I wanted clean white windows. This is a larger plate on a different project, and it has even larger windows that I wanted to print pure white. So I was able to use that cutter to cut all the way down through the plastic material and just get rid of it. Now, when I ink those, I'd ink it on over newsprint. Any ink that otherwise would have ended up as chatter in those areas ends up on the newsprint, and it never makes it to the press. Now, in that block, I wanted those to be clean. Now, but one problem is this cutter runs hot, and when you cut through the plastic, it tends to raise a bead of melted plastic. Let me show you a little bit of how that works. Helps if I plug it in. All right. It has an automatic setting, which is one I use most of the time, which means it adjusts its own vibrations. This works by extremely high frequency vibrations of that blade. It doesn't heat the blade, except that it does get hot in contact with a hard material. It uses the vibrations, the ultrasonic vibrations, to cut. And when you want to cut out an area, let's say this trapezoidal area, you just cut it out with the tool. Doesn't have to be perfect, because we're going to turn it over in a minute and finish the cuts. And I'll show you that bead that gets raised and how we get rid of it. If I turn the plate over, I can see the cuts. They're partial in places, but I can go through from the back and finish the cuts so that there are no bridges, nothing left to stick. And this is quite easy. It doesn't take a great deal of force. This would be really tedious trying to do it with a regular craft knife. So we can now get rid of that space. But we're left with, all the way around that cut, a raised ridge, and that will print black, and we don't want that. It's a completely unwanted area. The cure for that is to use the rotary tool to bevel all the way around. That removes that bead. Okay, that'll remove that bead so it won't print. You'll get a clean edge. It's best when using this to cut just in from the border of the white area you want, because you need a little space for that bevel. When you bevel, you're going to lose a little bit of that area when it's cut back. So you're best off if you will leave it just short of that edge. And then when you come back in and cut the bevel, you'll be right back up to the correct edge, right that you wanted to start with. You need a backing, by the way. When you're going to cut this, you need something to cut on, something to put the material on while you're cutting, so you're not tearing up your workspace or ruining your expensive cutting mat. They sell cutting mats supposedly made for using with an ultrasonic cutter. I bought one, and I sent it back. It didn't work. It cut, but it didn't heal the way we expect cutting mats to heal with a craft knife. It just tore it up. It turned out I found the best base is the Hessian side of traditional lino, just the jute backing on linoleum. You can cut through the plastic. It does minimal damage to the jute, and I've been using this backing for a long time, and I'm going to be able to use it for a lot longer time. I also use this cutter when I cut Duralar matte plastic to make the masks for the method I'll show in another video of printing shadows, gray shadows, in Linocut and with ABS plastic with one block and with only one ink, with only black ink. Now, this doesn't work very well on linoleum. With lino, it tends to melt so much. You can cut lino easily enough with a craft knife. But I did use this cutter to cut 1/8 inch MDF to make a press bed for my little cold laminating press that I use for all my relief, and we're going to do another video on the use of that cold laminator. I would not like to do work on ABS plastic without both these tools. They're inexpensive. They do a wonderful job that I badly need to be done. And with this rotary tool, I can do things on this ABS plastic that I simply could not do any other way. I couldn't do it with engraving tools very well, and I certainly couldn't do it on lino with lino tools. And I can cut those areas that I want rough as deep as I want, all the way down, or leave them rough and show the texture. This one that was in progress is carved so far. It's carved almost entirely with the rotary tool. But first, I outlined things with a burren, an engraving tool that does a fine line. That gave me a fine line that this tool can cut right up to, and is a good guide for cutting. This is also a project that I'll eventually use to show you some of that method for doing shadows in relief printing without changing inks or cutting a new block. I hope if you're interested in ABS plastics being carved for relief prints, these two tools are essentials. Later on, there'll be more in this series. As I said, the subject of printing shadows in relief prints is one, and there will be a couple of others. A couple of projects I want to show just to talk about how they were done with ABS plastics. And again, as always, I thank Chris Pigg of Black Pig Printmaking Studios. He has a YouTube channel under Chris Pigg and a website under Black Pig Printmaking Studio. He's in the UK. And it was on his YouTube channel that I learned about ABS plastic. He uses it as a substitute for end grain boxwood engraving. End grain boxwood blocks being very expensive anymore. So it's a wonderful thing to have learned about, and I owe him a lot for that information. So I'll see you next time, and hopefully, if you got an interest in this, have any questions, ask them down in the comments, and I will answer them. I do read the comments.